Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I am taking a look at Lee's Greatest Victory, Chancellorsville 1863, designed by Michael Rinella and published in Against the Odds magazine number 55. Lee's Greatest Victory is an area impulse game covering the time frame from April 30th to May 5th, 1863. It is made up of 6 day-long turns and a variable number of impulses. During each impulse, you'll be activating an area for a specific action. After completing that action, you'll be exhausting your units. Each time you take an action, the impulse marker goes up. You then make a momentum retention check by rolling against the current impulse number. If you roll less than, your side loses momentum, the other side takes over. Play goes back and forth like that until there's either an automatic victory, or more likely, an operational victory determined by comparing victory points that have been accrued by controlling specific areas and eliminating enemy units and leaders. Let's go ahead. We'll do a quick overview. I have a full tutorial and partial playthrough. I think it's a playthrough of just turn 1, but it's a pretty long, good overview of the game, actual tutorial of the game. So you go ahead and check that out. I also have a recon, so one of my unboxings. After this, I'll do my pros and cons, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. All right, quick overview of the game. You can see the map. I have it all set up here for the initial setup. You can see it's divided up into different areas. Different areas are going to be divided by either these dotted lines, by minor or major waterways, or, well, actually, those are going to be the ways. Those will divide up the different areas. And then around the perimeter of the map, there are zones. Zones have slightly different rules. Sometimes you can enter and leave from different areas, just sort of abstract the larger, outside the immediate battlefield area. Now, within each of these areas, you're going to see a couple factors. First off, you see a circle. It has a couple numbers. The top number is just the actual number of that area, has no gameplay effect. The bottom number has a huge gameplay effect. That is the terrain effect modifier that, when it comes to combat, specifically your defense, whatever units are initially there, the defensive units, they are going to be able to add that to their defense. You also notice that these are different colored than the rest. The rest are sort of the base color. Here, these are green on the bottom. This represents the wilderness, a very entangled, overgrown area. When it comes to movement, traditionally you can move area to area as you want, as long as you have the movement factors. With the wilderness, you do have to be following the road network to even move in the wilderness. In addition, it grants some bonuses to combat. And again, you can tell because the bottom terrain effect modifier is green. Sequence of play. So the game starts with momentum phase. Union has it automatically on turn 1. You'll be rolling off to see who has momentum. Again, there's some modifiers. These stars give a bonus to whatever controls those areas. Whoever gains has a higher total is going to gain momentum, which means they're going to start the turn with momentum. They're also going to start the turn with the advantage chit, which an advantage chit has a couple special abilities, which I'll go into a little bit later in the review. After that's the combat phase. That's where the majority of the game is played. Those are the impulses where you get to pick either an assault, a bombardment, or a pass. Assault, it may have assault in the name, really means you're activating an area and you're moving those units. There may be combat, there may not. Bombardment, you have artillery in the game. You can go ahead and bombard the same or an adjacent area. And a pass, if you feel like you've done enough, you can go ahead and just pass your turn. Momentum impulse system, I covered it a little bit here. You go ahead and you have an impulse. You're activating it once you have momentum. You get to do an impulse. You activate an area. Once that's done, you're going to move the impulse marker up on the track from 1, say, to 2. Then you start rolling a 1d6. You want to compare to that number. You want to get that number higher to retain momentum. If you get lower than that, you lose momentum. Control switches over to the other side. The other side now has momentum starting at 1, starting with the impulse of 1, and they get to go ahead and take their actions. As you're moving the units, they get exhausted. By the time you're done, it's going to get to the point where either everyone's exhausted or you feel like you've done enough movement, you've done your plan for the turn, you can go ahead and pass. And once both sides have passed or every unit is exhausted, the turn is going to end. Combat, fairly simple. There's some procedure to it, very simple. And I do multiple combats in my tutorial video, by the way. But basically, you're going to have units when they're moving, occupying the same area. You're going to go ahead and start comparing lead attacking unit. You start adding up different factors. Leaders, looking at how many units are there, looking at, do you have an integrity bonus? Do you have Try to think of any other modifiers offhand. Again, watch my other video for the full, into combat. I'm not going to show it right now. It's just a quick overview here. And then defenders in the same, including such as the, terrain defense modifier, the terrain effect modifier. You're going to roll, each side will roll 2d6, add it to that attack total and that defense total, and then compare it. Maybe if you get higher, the attack gets higher, it's going to be a success. The defender has to take what are called casualty points, which is the difference. So if one side had 20, the other side had 15. There's 5 casualty points. The defender, or whoever side had less than, is going to have to take the casualty points, assigning to units. Casualty points could be as simple as, hey, flip a unit from fresh to exhausted side. That's 1 casualty point. Or it may be, hey, you're going to have to eliminate some units. Go ahead, eliminate an exhausted unit as 2. So if you have a fresh unit and to eliminate them, use up 3 casualty points. You can also retreat usually, and that'll be 1 casualty point. You go ahead and there's a chart and you'll assign them as you want. But if you roll less than as the attacker, you may result in a repulse, in which case you're going to lose unit automatically, and then you're going to have to be retreating. So the kind of combat is it's very dependent on those die rolls, but you do have those modifiers and you can kind of adjust things and kind of get combat where you at least have an advantage, although combat is, because of the 2d6 die rolls, it's generally never a sure thing. Covered combat, victory, I mentioned that before. It's automatic for the Union if they control a path of areas. So if they start off, Union's controls on the opposite side of the rivers. Confederates control over here, other than one area over here. The U.S. has control markers they're going to place down as they move their units. They take over areas. If both of them are in an area, it'll be contested. Once one side's eliminated, the other side takes control of that area. Union has that full path. They get an automatic victory. From over there, all the way over here. Fairly difficult. Generally going to make it through the game and have to check for an operational victory, which is the Union accruing enough victory points. So you have victory point track up there from controlling certain victory point locations. You can see there, red circles, and say VP, can't miss them, and eliminating enemy units while avoiding losses of their own. I think that's it for the overview. Again, watch my tutorial video for more in-depth look at the game. Otherwise, let's get to the pros and cons. All right, pros and cons. As usual, cons first, then I'll do my pros. First con, the rulebook, it has some organization issues. The biggest problem in my eyes is things seem out of order and there is information missing from key parts of the rulebook. An example, if you look under the sequence of play. Under the reorganization phase, it mentions the Union and Confederate players have the opportunity to reorganize eliminated units. What it doesn't say, but what you can do during this phase, is that you can place entrenchment markers. Entrenchment markers are an important part of the game. Deciding when and where to build defensive works is a big part, the ebb and flow of this type of game and battle, especially during the American Civil War. In fact, not only is it not mentioned in the actual sequence of play, but if you go to the section in the rulebook on the reorganization module, it's actually not listed there either. It says nothing about entrenchment. Instead, you have to remember or have read all the way to module 15. Now you may say, wait, you're going to read through the rulebook learning a game. Absolutely. I know that's how I do it, right? It's how you learn to play a game generally. Or you watch, a video that someone else does. But if you read through it, right, don't tell me you can remember offhand 16 pages of rules or really any number, right? There's going to be things you have to look up. We're going to go check that sequence of play and you're not going to find it. So you may forget you can even do that, especially as you're playing through and you're checking the sequence of play. Okay, yep, all right, that's what I can do this turn, etc., during this phase, etc. The sequence of play should list all the actions you can or have to take, then have the references to the appropriate module sections of the rulebook, just go in depth. Another example of the confusing rulebook writing is a note in the middle of the combat phase. It says, a player possessing the advantage who loses momentum during the combat phase does not lose control of the advantage as they would have done after having lost momentum during the momentum phase. That's confusing and it makes no sense. The momentum phase starts with players determine which side has momentum at the start of the current game turn. You then decide momentum with a roll-off, which I'd explained it before. So no one loses momentum during the momentum phase because no one has it to start. You were determining it at the beginning of that phase. And once it's determined, you immediately go to the next phase, the combat phase. Just unnecessary confusion, and unfortunately, a frequent theme of this rulebook. Speaking of momentum, the game lacks an easy way out of the box to see which side has momentum during a turn and a way to keep track of the advantage use. So let me see if I can kind of explain it. The game, turn, and advantage share the same marker. One side is blue. The other side is butternut, right, for the rebels. So the real problem is when which side has momentum changes during a turn, which is during the combat phase, right? One side fails a momentum retention check. You can't flip the gain turn advantage marker to show the change of momentum because that represents who started the turn with the advantage and who currently has it. But the impulse marker, which you would think would be good for that then, right? Well, I mean, it's white on the front and it's blank, a butternut color, but blank on the back. So that doesn't intuitively work either. In addition, when you read the section of the rulebook about advantage, it says advantage is indicated by the controlling player's side being face up in its holding box on the map. Well, what holding box? Do you mean the turn track? Now, thankfully, the backside of the impulse marker, like I mentioned, while blank, is butternut, and the front is white. So at least it's a different color. So I got used to the white side representing the Union and the butternut side representing the Confederates. But that's what I had to do, right? I do have two incredibly easy solutions to avoid this whole mess from the beginning. One, the impulse marker should be double-sided. It should have a Union graphic on one side and a Confederate graphic on the other, so you can tell who has momentum and whose impulse it is at a glance. Two, this advantage marker, it shouldn't be this. It should be a turn marker, and then there should be a separate advantage marker in the holding box, like it says, that indicates who has it, and it'd be double-sided, and as soon as one side uses it, you go ahead and pull it, place it on the impulse track, and then when the impulse momentum switches over to the other side, they can go ahead and put it back in the box to show that they now have the advantage and have that available to use. I shouldn't have to muddle my way through multiple turns until I figure out a solution to myself. Because when I first started playing, I was like, how am I going to keep track of this stuff? And I kind of finally got figured out a system of, well, this side, this, and this side I'll use the blank side for that. Shouldn't have to do that. It should be that way out of the box. Now, one action you can take with the advantage marker that blew my mind at first, steal a march. Each side can use it once per turn, and when used, every exhausted unit on the map flips to their fresh side. My initial reaction was this must be a typo. Then I thought about it some more, and I wondered if the rule existed, especially with the name, right, Steal a March, to allow for Jackson's historical flanking march in May. And I asked about it over on Consim World, and the designer, Michael Rinella, and others who were involved in the game confirmed, yep, that's what it was, right? It's used to replicate both Hooker's initial Union surprise movement and Jackson's flanking maneuver. Okay, I understand replicating those parts of the battle in the game. After all, without them, would it even be the Battle of Chancellorsville? However, in my experience, this rule can create too many such cases of wild swings and long marches around the enemy. It also, if played later in a person's turn, can really extend the length of the game quite a bit. There's dozens of units, and by activating it, they're all flipped over from exhausted to fresh for both sides. I understand they wanted to design for effect here, and, although special rules and rules exceptions are never ideal, especially I don't always love them, I feel in this case, I would rather have just seen a special rule for turn 1, say for Hooker's movement, turn 2 for Jackson's. Call it Steal a March on turn 1, Hooker gets, bonus to movement, or he can call a refresh of his. Turn 2, or both sides, that's fine. Whatever would work for balance. Again, you have to play test it, of course. Turn 2 for Jackson, let him do that because of his flanking marches as well. Keep the name, but don't let it be something that both sides can use every single turn of the game. I mean, if I was playing face-to-face with somebody and they kept doing it like later in the turn, I would probably get up and quit. I'd be like, I'm done. I'm not gonna stretch this game out longer than it should be. I did grow more comfortable with the Steal a March as I played, but I kind of knew how I played it how I wanted to, where I played it really early, kind of get it out of the way without thinking, oh, I'll just use it later. And I don't know if that's really the intention of it. So, I just feel there may be a better option out there to recreate that historical realism, of each side's movements. All right, now going to my pros. So the map, the counters, they have a fantastic look to them that only grew on me as I played. There were a couple of visual aspects I was worried about to start with. The counters are simple to look at when you first see them. The dotted lines that show the area borders, I thought maybe would be confusing. Initial initial glance, my first impression, right? But after playing the game a bunch, I appreciate them way more, and everything is very clear. The areas are clear, easy to tell them apart, and I love that the infantry counters is. Although at first I was like, oh, NATO symbology in an old, in a Civil War game, like, fine. I know that you have to tell what's infantry and what's not, but I'm like, really? But look, if you look, it's actually their cross bayonets, not just, standard, it's not just two cross lines. I love that. Nice artistic touch. As usual then, kudos to Mark Mahaffey for a great job with the map, great job with the counters, assuming he did the counters as well. I believe he did. Correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong. Second pro, game works very well solitaire thanks to that momentum system. You don't know if one side is going to be able to activate just 1, 2, 3, or, possible, but increasingly unlikely 4 or more areas before that momentum changes back to the other side. I appreciate that sort of chaos, that uncertainty in a solo game. It's really hard to overthink or plan ahead when you don't even know how many activations you're going to get, during your impulse before it switches over. Finally, although these sorts of battles are hard to simulate perfectly, after all, with the benefit of hindsight and the lack of any real consequences for, men in your army, for us gamers, we're unlikely to repeat the same nervous mistakes that, say, ruined Joseph Hooker's reputation and cost him the battle. Despite all that, my games played out close to the historical outcome. The beauty of the system and the game is that you can choose to act differently. So commanding the Union forces, instead of retreating, you made those gains and then retreating, what if you remain aggressive? What if you press the Confederates at every opportunity? Your superior numbers, simulated less with more counters and more with a big combat bonus that the Union gets when they're attacking. It gives you a different outcome than what happened historically, or it could, right? Or it may not, or maybe it'll cost you bigger and maybe you'll end up losing because you get pushed back. I view both simulating history and creating new history, possibilities, as really preferred in my historical war games, and this game gives you both those opportunities. This may be the hardest review I've ever done. Now, I've trashed games before, figuratively and literally, and I've shouted from the rooftops about how great a particular game is, thankfully for my neighbors, only figuratively on that one. The reason this review has been particularly hard for me is I had such high hopes for the game because I have such high opinion of the designer. I think I've enjoyed every game that Mike Rinella has designed, certainly the ones I've played. And I've covered at least 2 of them on my channel with multiple videos. So you know how much I love the Area Impulse system and I love his designs. But there's something about this game that just doesn't click for me. I believe the primary reason is what I consider to be, simply put, a poor rulebook. It takes what is not a complex system, makes it harder to learn and play. I won't rehash everything of what I've already pointed out during all my cons, but it has superfluous information in some locations. It's a poor layout, things are out of order, and there's just literally plain wrong or misworded information that is confusing. The rulebook, it's a mess, and it hurt the experience for me. Now, the gameplay is excellent. I think it simulates the battle and campaign well enough. Aside from the Steal a March advantage that, while clearly fulfilling a design role in the game, has, easy potential to disrupt, extend the game, twice a turn, every turn, the entire game. Otherwise, the system does allow for a lot of back and forth, with a battle plan only surviving as long as your impulse lasts. And frequently, it's going to be interrupted by enemy movement before you can finish what you had planned. Kudos there, it fits the battle well. One thing I do want to address that I did read, a very influential member of our hobby, Charles Vassy, said he is uneasy with the order of battle of the game. He said it over on Content World. I didn't see him offer an exact explanation of what he was concerned about, but he did end up bringing up Longstreet. So I can only assume he's concerned because the game does include counters for Longstreet and his soldiers. Men that weren't involved in the battle since they were initially stationed too far away by Lee, before it started. Well, those are completely optional units, and something I'm glad they included. It's always nice having optional rules and units for a game, as long as the core of the game doesn't require them to be good, to be both a good simulation and good fun. The regular setup follows the order battle as far as I can see. Now, I will give the disclaimer that while I have a strong passion for the American Civil War and for games on the American Civil War, I'm certainly not an expert on the order of battle for every battle. So if something is wrong, is off, mention it below, mention it over in Content World, let everyone know. At the end of the day, I regret that I can't give this one a strong recommendation. I went into it just excited and glad to get it to the table and looking forward to it. Sometimes, though, a rule book, it can make or break a game. In the case of Lee's Greatest Victory, it hurts the experience too much for me to give it a pass. Although, let me be clear, it's not a bad game, and you may not have the same issue with it as me. My issues lie primarily, although not exclusively, with the rulebook. Don't let me completely dissuade you from giving the game a look. Just be aware going in, and maybe your experience won't be soured like mine was. Sometimes you start off, that first impression can kind of ruin it from there out. Maybe go ahead and check out the rulebook. Against the Odds Magazine always uploads the rulebook to their website. Go ahead and check that out and see if it makes sense for you. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this overview and review. Let me know your thoughts on the game and your thoughts on my review in the comments below. Do you like the game? Have you played it and you like it? Do you completely disagree with my comments? Share your opinion. That's just my opinion on the game, and my opinion on kind of the setup, the rule book, how everything plays out. Good and bad. I'm always honest with you guys, and I think everyone expects that from me. I'm not someone who automatically goes negative. I'm not someone who automatically goes positive. I'm going to give you, I want to say the truth because it's not necessarily the truth, right? It's my opinion. I'm giving you my honest opinion, though. That said, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below if you did and your thoughts. But until next time, everyone, later.